We're studying the life of Abraham, which is a study in faith. And he becomes the first man in the Bible that God teaches this principle of living by faith. And that really is the way the Christian is to live by faith. This third lesson is what I call disastrous decisions. And it just shows how that problems can affect our life. We are not perfect. We may make some bad decisions that cost us a lot, but it's not the end of our life. We're still here. Whereas someone said we're still vertical, so we can still make decisions and go on with our life. Let me use for a text Genesis the 12th chapter and verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. Wow, what a statement. And Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. We're talking about the promised land. We're talking about the land that God specifically promised to Abram, that he gets there, and the first thing he discovers after God revealed himself to him, he builds an altar and worships God, a famine came to the land. Now here's what we have to learn. Living by faith doesn't mean we won't have any problems. It's one of the things you've got to continue to remind yourself. This is not heaven. We're not home yet. We're on a journey. We're going someplace. And yes, there will be problems. So living by faith doesn't mean we won't have any problems. Living by faith means we learn to trust God in spite of our problems. Instead of turning to our own scheming, our own devices and such, no, we learn to trust God in the midst of it. And you will discover God will help you. God will work miracles many times in your behalf. But this is what Abram has to learn in this lesson. A faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. That's more than just a cliche. It is true of life. And things that have not been tested, been put through the fire, you don't really know how it's going to turn out yet. So Abram's life is, he's learning to live this life of faith. But faith is a lifestyle that involves risk. In fact, faith can't grow in our lives without taking some risk. It's always a part of faith, is there is a risk that is involved. And what we have to do is go through the school of faith. In the school of faith, of course, there will be some tests. None of us like the test, but the truth is we wouldn't learn very much if it wasn't for the test. It's the test that make us pay attention. It's the test that makes us study. It's the test, and God's the one that gives the test in life. You never know when he's going to call for a test, a surprise exam. Nobody likes it, but it's a part of life to see if you're really learning the lessons out of the school of faith. Now, let's go back to Abram's life here. He gets to the land, and the first thing he discovers is a famine in the land. And it said it was so severe, he leaves and goes down to Egypt. It's what I will call Abram's disappointment. Have you ever been disappointed with God? Be honest with yourself. I certainly has. Have you ever prayed and you believed you were praying for the right thing, but God didn't answer your prayer the way you wanted him to? He answered a different way. That's what we're talking about here, disappointment. As Abram comes to the land of Canaan, the first thing he discovers, the land is full of Canaanites. And not only is all these Canaanites there, these are not nice people. They are an idolatrous people. In fact, they might have even been as bad or worse than the folks back in Ur of Chaldees. At least he was at home there and he knew the culture. Now he's among strangers and he can't trust them either. Boy, I've discovered people are just people. It doesn't matter where you travel in this world, People are simply people. We were discussing earlier with some of the students about what country do you like the best? The truth is, I am incurably in love with people. I love people. It doesn't matter to me what their culture is, what their language is, what the color of their skin, what kind of food they make. No. People are just people. And you have to learn that. And you will never help anyone until you love them first. Love them first. And so he comes to this land, and then the Bible said, a famine comes to the land. It's not bad enough that we've got all these wicked idolaters in the land, but now we've got a famine in the land that forced him to make a decision. What was he going to do? God had told him to go there, but God hadn't given specific instructions beyond that. Now listen to me carefully. This is one of those things that I have learned the hard way. You see all these scars, and that's where I learned a lot of lessons, making some bad choices, bad decisions. And that's what Abram does. He makes a decision, but it's not a good decision. God had said nothing about Egypt. I've learned, speak where the Bible speaks. Be silent where the Bible is silent. Well, I think that is something if we would learn that principle, we would avoid a lot of the conflicts and struggles that we go through in life. Speak where the Bible speaks, be silent where the Bible is silent. We can have our opinions, but that's all it is. It's just our opinion. It's not, thus saith the Lord. So Abram makes his decision. Even godly people make mistakes. Abram was a godly man. Abram was called by God, and God is going to use Abram's life to change the world. He became one of the greatest influencers in this world, even to this day. He changed our world. But even godly people make mistakes. You will make mistakes. To make no mistakes is a mistake, because you're not making any decisions. Anytime we make decisions, there's always the risk involved that we'll make the wrong choice. I remember many years ago, but it's kind of a humorous story from Kansas City, Missouri. A friend of mine, that he was talking to a police officer that worked an accident. And this particular intersection, or the roadway, there was a train track that came across the road, and there's this bridge over the road. It had a big pillar right in the center of these two lanes of traffic, one-way street, and it's got two lanes, and they've got flashing arrows pointing to the different lanes. And this poor lady runs her car right smack into the concrete pillar. And the police officer said, "Ma'am, couldn't you see that pillar?" "Oh, yes, officer." "Well, didn't you see those flashing arrows pointing the two different directions?" "Yes, sir, I saw them." "Well, why did you run into the pillar?" She said, "I couldn't make up my mind which one I wanted to go." Oh my, to make no decision is a decision. And so many people, they lead by default, really, making their decisions. So it's a mistake for him to go to Egypt. God never told him to do it. Egypt was a disaster for him. There was no promise from God in Egypt. Now beware of that. Beware of that. It's better to leave the choice up to God. God knows what's best. When we start making the decisions, we're going to get in trouble. Now, the basic thing here, and I think it shows his disappointment, he's trying to get away from his problems. Listen to me. You cannot outrun your problems. You cannot run away from trouble. In fact, the truth is, the harder you run away from trouble, the harder you will run into trouble, because it's going to be there waiting for you when you get wherever you're going. You've got to learn to deal with it right here. God said nothing about going to Egypt. But he's gone to scheming again. He's trying to figure it out himself. And so he said, let's do something. Now, when I was a young preacher, I had a lot of philosophies that I've had to change, things I had to learn. And one of those was, I've always been a person of high energy. Let's do something. And I would make statements. Let's do something, even if it's wrong. No, that's not good. That is not good. If you don't know the right thing to do, then wait on God and seek his face. That's what he should have done. He should have built another altar and asked God for direction. But instead, he starts trying to get away from his problems. There's a famine in the land, all these bad people, so he takes off for Egypt. What's the first thing he experienced when he left for Egypt? Fear. Fear. As he's headed for Egypt, he looks over at Sarah and he says, "You are so beautiful." And I've heard that the Pharaoh in Egypt is fond of pretty women. Oh my, it set him up for a disastrous decision, one that's going to affect him the rest of his life, one he's going to live with. A terrible decision that he made. See, his fear should have signaled to him, you're going the wrong way. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, of a sound mind. He becomes afraid to say that Sarah is his wife because they might kill me for you. And that was a possibility. Pharaohs had been known to do that before, and so it was a possibility. But he's asking his wife to lie for him. Now, we're not talking about a sinner here. We're not talking about somebody who doesn't know God. We're talking about a godly man. Oh, my. Oh, we all have to deal with this carnal nature. You're never going to get away from it. What he should have done, he should have been trying to protect her. What a disgrace. What a disgrace. And the moment that you start making decisions based on fear, you're going to be making bad choices, bad decisions. It will end up in a disaster. What about the promised son that God had promised them? I'm going to give you a son, you and Sarah. What about that? He forgot all about that. All he's doing is thinking about himself. That is very selfish, it's very carnal, but it shows where Abram was at this stage in his life. Instead of protecting her, he's asking her to protect him. Wow, what a tragedy. What a tragedy. And we're going to see, as I called it, disastrous decisions. That's exactly what it was. A bad, bad decision. So, because of this bad decision, Pharaoh welcomes Abram into Egypt, and he gives him a lot of gifts. And the Bible said it was because of Sarah. He liked this beautiful woman, and so since she's not married, he's going to give her brother, like it's, dowry monies for the wedding. And he's giving her all this money and all these gifts that he gives. But notice something. Everything that he gained in Egypt caused him trouble. Everything that he got, Hagar, that became a big problem for him. All the money that he got, that's what ended up splitting him and Lot, having to go different directions. Everything that he gained only causes him problems. And then when it comes to his family, to his wife, he loses Sarai's respect. Wow, it's one of the things I could not understand as a young man. As a young man, I'm interested in conquering the world, killing giants, doing something great for God. But the older I get, you know, the thing that I hunger for more than anything else is simply respect. Respect. I don't have to kill any more giants. I don't have to. No, God's done so many things. I just want people to show respect. That's what he lost. And that's what you will lose when you start making bad decisions based on fear. Now, the third thing that I see here in this story is what I will call his dishonor. His dishonor. The first thing that was dishonor was when Pharaoh learned what was going on, and God brought judgment on Pharaoh's house. I tell you, I read so many of these stories in the Bible, and they just amaze me. There was a curse brought on Pharaoh's house because of Abram, the righteous man. Abram, the man living by faith. I wonder how many curses we bring on the world because we have the wrong testimony. That's what's happening here. He loses the respect of Pharaoh. In fact, the Bible said they drove him out. It was a strong word that's used here. They sent him away. It literally means they forced him out of Egypt. Get out of here. They couldn't get rid of him quick enough. I don't want to do that. You lose the respect of people. You lose your testimony. And there's no way that you're going to be able to lead them to Christ, to influence them for Christ, because you have lost your testimony with them. That's what happens to him. They sent him away. He's got a bad testimony. Not only was that, but he loses the respect of his wife. And we see this very, very significantly in chapter 16, where Sarah comes to Abram with this idea: marry my servant girl, and whatever children she has, I will adopt them, and we will fulfill God's promise. That is not even natural. There's one of the things that God has made in women is they like a husband of one woman. The Bible talks about this, and it literally is the word that is used there when it talks about elders and deacons in the church, and it says husband of one wife. It just literally means a one-woman man. That's literally what it means, and is literal a translation as you can get. A one-woman man. What woman would want to give up her husband to another woman? That's not even natural. It's because she's lost respect for him. She's now trying to figure out a way herself that she can fulfill God's promises, but she's lost the respect for Abram. I think the roots of that goes back to this trip to Egypt, where he asked her to lie for him. She lost his respect. It's one of the things that I live by, one of my principles in life, that I want the people that know me the best to respect me the most. I don't always want them to agree with me, because sometimes I'm not even right. Sometimes I'm just trying to figure it out. But what I do want is their respect. I want the people that know me the best to respect me the most. That's what he has lost. He's lost the respect of his own family, of his own wife. Oh my, what a tragedy. Here's another one. He lost the respect of his nephew Lot. Lot, who had followed him up to this point, now Lot has seen a side of Abram he's not seen before. The decision to go to Egypt had a big effect on Lot. It affected him in a way that he never got away from it, in fact. The Bible says when Lot went and he looked at the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, and it was well watered like the plains of Egypt when you're going into Goshen. How does he know that? He knows it because that's where Abram had taken him. He had taken him there. And so he learns from Abram a bad way of living. Take care of yourself. You got to, take care of number one. That's you. No, that's a worldly philosophy. That is not a Christian philosophy. Sure, we need to take care of our bodies and such, but I'm talking about when you're thinking about making decisions based on what am I going to get out of this? What's this going to do for me? Then you're making wrong choices because your philosophy is wrong. They gained a lot of wealth and riches in Egypt. However, it only becomes a problem. So when you come the 13th chapter of Genesis, they've come back to Canaan now. It causes the division between Lot and Abram, that he leaves his uncle Abram because they had too much cattle for the water and the grass to support in one area. So he tries to take advantage of his uncle Abram. Where did he learn those philosophies? He learned it by Abram taking him to Egypt. Be very careful about the decisions you make, because it's not only going to affect your life, it's going to affect all those that are around you. Here's the fourth thing that I learned in this. It's what I will call Abram's deliverance. Abram's deliverance. There's a good statement. God's will never lead us where his grace cannot keep us. That's a powerful statement. So if you want to be kept by God, do the will of God. Follow God's direction upon your life. God's will never lead us where his grace cannot keep us. But Egypt, that was out of God's will. And so there's no way that God can bless him and prosper him. Oh, yes, he got some money, but it became a curse to him. It becomes a problem. Abram realizes, while he's in Egypt, I've made a bad choice. This is a bad decision. And as they're forcing him out, he makes the decision, I'm going to try to make this right. So he goes back to the place he had come from. The first place he goes to Canaan. When he comes to Canaan, though, he discovers, even though there's been a famine in Canaan, the problem is not with the land. That's not the problem. Now, I'm sure if you would have asked him when he was leaving, he would have said, it's because of the famine. I'm trying to get away from the famine. But now that he's returned, he realizes it wasn't the famine. God could have kept me right here in Canaan, but I made the decision to leave. The famine is not the real problem. No, the real problem was something else. See, we cannot blame the world for our bad decisions. Again, we are avoiding the issue. It's what we call smoke screens. We want to pretend like I'm not the problem, it's somebody else. And we want to point our finger and play the blame game, blame somebody else. It's because of what you did, what you said. Abram has to be honest with himself and say, the problem is not the land. No, that's not the problem. He found out something else. He goes to the place where he had pitched his tent. But at the tent, it's not the problem in his tent. No, that's not the problem at all. And the same is true with us. We cannot blame our families for our bad decisions. We like to do that sometimes, but no. The problem's not the land, it's not the world, the problem is not the Canaanites, and it's not our family. Then Abram goes the third place. He goes to the place where he had built the altar the first time. Wow. When I read that, it makes me want to cry, because I realize now he's getting serious with God. He goes back to the place of the altar. And when he goes back to the place of the altar, he discovers the problem was in my heart. The problem was inside me. That's where the real problem lies. It was at the altar. And again, the altar is a place where we deal with our personal life. That's the place where we say no to ourselves and yes to God. Someone has described the altar as the cross. And the best description of the cross is where my will crosses his will. It's at that place where we meet God. And that's where Abram discovers that's his problem. The problem was with my heart. And so it's here at the altar that he starts restoring his relationship with God. Now, the good news is we can build another altar. God is still there. He never left. We are the ones that left. God is still waiting for us. And the Bible said that Abram called on the name of the Lord. I would encourage you, no matter what the situation is, the circumstance, the problem that you're facing in life, and we all do this, every one of us do this. It'll happen again and again through your journey of life. Build you another altar. God is still waiting for you. And if you will do business with God, God will do business with you. He calls on the name of the Lord. Thank God, God's still waiting for us. Now, looking at Egypt again. In Egypt, there is no altar. Not one. It's never mentioned. No. There's no relationship with God. All he's trying to do is live off of yesterday's altar, yesterday's experience. You can't do that. He's in the wrong place. So in Egypt, there is no altar. In Egypt, there's no presence of God, no fellowship with God. Listen to me, friend. One of the greatest things in your life is God's presence. It's God to be with you, and you know that. Remember the words of King Saul when he said, God does not answer me anymore. What a terrible place to be, where you cannot hear from God. That's where Abram was in Egypt. There's no fellowship with God, no altars with God. There are no promises from God. God doesn't say anything in Egypt. Pharaoh's talking, Sarah's talking, the Egyptians are talking, but God's not talking. That might be an indication that you're out of the will of God. So what you need to do is turn around. In Egypt, all there was a desolate home. All there was a wretched sense of being in the wrong place, doing the wrong things. I would encourage you, do what Abram did. Turn around. Go back until you get to the place of the altar. Build another altar. Go back to the place of the altar, and at the place of the altar, you'll find that God never left you. God never deserted you. God was waiting for him all the time. Now, what he had done, he had allowed his problems, his circumstances to take control of his life. That's a mistake. The Bible says in the book of Romans, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. And the word that is used there literally meant a mature son, an adult son. Not a boy anymore, he's a man. As many as are led by the Spirit of God, not led by their circumstances, not led by their problems, not led by the led by the Spirit of God. And so I challenge you, do the same thing. If Abram had built the altar, he would have found God was still waiting for him. But instead of that, he tries to run away from his troubles, run away from his problems, and all he did was create a bigger problem, one that he continued to live with the rest of his life. And so I encourage you, go back to the place of the altar.